Do a quick summary.
Sure. Yeah. So, Ken and I went back through our notes before getting on the call with you, so I could kind of refresh my memory from our discussion. But a lot of, I think, what we talked about in the room with you informed a kind of an overall framing that we're coming to about positions of strength that Nordstrom has and should be leveraged to create advantage and reputation. As well as those areas that maybe less well understood and are greater opportunities to begin to shape reputation around. So I would say that there's kind of 4 key areas as we think about building a narrative around a position of strength. One is the unwavering focus on and commitment to the customer, and it's interesting. We had a conversation with you about this during our last interview, and we had this discussion with Eric earlier tonight, which is, I think, a distinction between the notion of customer service and customer experience. We in our thinking have broken that out in kind of two separate but related platforms, and that the customer, Nordstrom's focus on the customer is a thread that runs through everything. But when we think about service, we think about, the experience that the customer has kind of, with you, whether that's digitally or physically, but the actual experience of shopping with Nordstrom, from, the access to a certain kind of merchandise to, service in a more traditional sense, from the recovery. And we think about, commitment to the customer and the experience of the customer as really being around a growing awareness of changing habits and expectations and Nordstrom's continued evolution in that. So service really being how Nordstrom touches the customer, and experience really being around what you know of the customer and how you build sort of the shopping experience around what the customer wants, around, around where the customer is in his or her, life or mindset at that particular time. So those are kind of 2 pieces of our framing, and I'm curious to hear your reaction to that. But then also brand stewardship, the ability to develop partnerships and cultivate brands as a core strength, and that this may be certainly an area of strength, but perhaps one in which Nordstrom is less well understood, but is emerging in that way. And I know that was a big part of our discussion the last time we talked to you, which is really establishing Nordstrom as being well understood as the premier or the priority partner of choice for innovating, incubating, and creating new product concepts and launching new brands. And then finally, Nordstrom is being kind of on the forefront of understanding the retail experience in a different way. Can we stop? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, keep going.
And it's really understanding the shopping experience in a different way. And so one of the things that we had talked to Blake and Eric about earlier was this sort of notion of kind of dispensing with the idea of channels and really thinking about it more as a set of powerful assets that reside within an ecosystem. And, you are understanding how to bring those assets to bear to create an experience that is differentiated and to be somewhat kind of channel agnostic in that regard. That it's not really about physical or digital. It's really about, having the ability to create a collection of assets that, make the experience more and more relevant and more modern for the customer. So those are kind of how we've come to think about a set of strengths that Nordstrom has. And I think in terms of opportunity, a lot of the opportunity seems to be around building reputation, around the idea of innovation and particularly technology and digital innovation, in that space. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts and reactions to that, if you could follow everything I just said.
Well, I'll not go through it in the same order you went through it. One point I wanted to just build on is the point about building brand partnerships or developing brands and the extent to which that's well understood or not well understood. I think one context that is maybe important around that is actually, that is something that if you think about the history of Nordstrom over the last 20 years, we actually were really good at that in the previous iteration of how the industry developed. And I'll give you 3 tangible examples, and there may be many more. But if you think about Mac, Uggs, and Tom's, so Uggs and Tom in the shoe category, and Mac in beauty, we singularly were responsible for building all 3 of those into monster brands, not just with us, I mean, in the industry. So if you go back and look at it, Ugg didn't exist without us, and we brought them, to the American market. We were their partner in just scaling the hell out of that thing. Tom's didn't really exist without us, and we scaled the hell out of that thing. Mac was, we got on that early, and we really helped co-build that into one of the biggest beauty brands in the country and in the industry. And Pete and others would have better, memory of some of the others. But my point about that is that we historically were really good at taking these brands over a period. In those cases, it took, 5 or 10 years to incubate them, partner with them, grow them, scale them, and then they become these monsters. What's changed, and one of the things that's changed in the last 5 years, is that the amount of time that things take to scale and become meaningful and relevant is just shortened immeasurably. And so that kind of previous model of we find it, we bring it in 5 stores, and then in 20 stores, and then 100 stores, and then it becomes bigger and bigger, and then one day it kind of jumps the shark and it's everywhere. And that's kind of Uggs is still huge for us, and Tom's like sort of went away in the sense of as it got over distributed and kind of was yesterday's news. What's changed now is that whole process that might have taken 5 or 10 years before takes 2 or 3 years now, from a brand you've never heard of to everyone's wearing it. And so I don't think what's changed is so much that, I think we've always been, our merchant teams have always been quite good at being a different kind of partner for brands. But now what's challenging is we got to be really super sharp and fast at doing that earlier, recognizing that brands probably aren't going to scale to the same size they used to. And they're certainly going to be a lot shorter. You just don't have that period to kind of learn together and kind of grow in this very sheltered kind of way. It just doesn't exist. So that's why I think what you see us doing now is taking a broader set of bets on earlier and digitally native brands, other emerging brands, and we should. But I think it's a similar thing. We're telling our story now to digitally native brands that we used to tell to more traditional brands, which is, we're here to build something with you. We're not here to cannibalize your business. Unlike some other people, we don't see everybody else's margin as our opportunity. We think there's a way to win together, but it's with a different scale. It's sort of, not to get too far off track, but I think it's sort of the equivalent of what's happened in the venture industry, which is that, you have to be earlier when you're making investments, because venture used to be about writing $10 million checks in, an A round of a company that already had a bunch of revenue and proved itself to be profitable and now was going to scale. And now it's about writing $1 million check in an angel round that, hardly, maybe an idea on the back of a napkin, because it doesn't cost as much to scale businesses. And the same thing's true of brands. So anyway, I think on the brand stewardship thing, it's just interesting. I think the other thing that I'm not going to try to answer, but the other thing that's interesting that came up a little bit with the Wall Street Journal interviewer is I think there's this question that people have out there that I think is the wrong question. I get it, but I think it's the wrong question as it pertains to us, which is, why do brands need department stores anymore? They can go direct to consumer. And to me, that actually makes more sense if you were asking Macy's that question. If you were asking a department store whose only kind of way of building your brand was to put you in a branded shop next to somebody else's branded shop next to somebody else's branded shop, then, the fact you can go direct to consumer with your own stores or with your own website, you can replicate that experience and have more control over it as an individual brand. But that's never been our model. Our model has always been about creating a shopping experience that's an integrated experience across brands. So what's the role of a department store in a world where brands can go direct to consumer? Well, I'm not sure there is a role for the landlord department store that's run on a concession model with a bunch of branded shops. But I think there is a role for a shopping experience that gives people a discovery experience that's curated and is multi-brand and cross-category, et cetera, which has always been our model. I actually think our model is more resonant today than it used to be, because our model is differentiated. If you want to have just a pure one brand experience, then by all means go to their store or go to their website. If you want to have an experiential multi-brand discovery experience, then come to us. And that's what you actually see on the ground, right? It's the reason why it doesn't hurt Madewell's business to be in our store, even if they have their own store in the same center. Same thing with Topshop, right? And because customers are looking for something different when they want to have a multi-brand discovery experiential kind of shopping journey. That is different from, I know I want to buy Topshop and all I'm trying to figure out is where to buy this particular item. So I think the question about what's the role of department store today's world, I don't think there is a role for the traditional model. I think that is becoming sort of less and less relevant. But I actually think it makes our model more relevant. So I don't quite know what you do with that. But I realize people keep asking this question, and I think, well, your question is right if you're talking to Bloomingdale's or Macy's. I don't think it's the right question if you're talking to us.
That's a key differentiator that will help drive our narrative.
Yeah.
Right.
And then sorry, go on.
No, please continue.
I mean, I think the service experience differentiation is important. I don't know. I think I don't know. Internally, it's important. I'm not sure how you communicate it externally. In other words, internally, I think there's a problem. Not a problem. I think there's been a mindset when we talk about customer obsession coming through the lens of improving customer service that has a whole bunch of kind of inherent bias to it and baggage to it. I mean, people think of customer service as if you use those words in the store, all they think it's about is the interaction of a salesperson with a customer standing in front of them. And so when we've kind of said, look, our focus is on customer experience, it's been to kind of force a different language around how we're trying to win. And the way we're trying to win is by, to your point, evolving how we interact with the customers and to be really customer focused in how we think about their journeys with us, to realize that a lot of how we're going to improve customer service or customer experience is to recognize that on many of their journeys, they don't want to interact with people. And that's good service. I use this example all the time with our people that says how much, and it's tricky to talk about this stuff in our culture, but it's okay, so, our people are a huge asset. Yeah, they're great. Okay, so you're a Nordstrom employee. Do you work with a stylist? If you go and talk to a lot of people in corporate, a lot of people have a salesperson or a stylist. And I'm okay, so when you need to be in and out of the store really fast, you just need to buy a pair of socks. Do you go talk to your stylist or salesperson and go, God, no, I try to avoid them at all cost. Right? And that's the point, right? It's you cannot work with your stylist if you're on a mission-based shop and you want to be in and out in 5 minutes, because they won't let you.
No.
They're so hardwired to sell you and serve you that it's like, and so it's like people, everyone's putting disguises on to duck into the store and avoid their person, right? I mean, but that's true, right? I mean, I think it's actually inherent in the problem of service versus experience. Sometimes the experience you want to have is super fast on your terms. Well, that's not customer service as the way a lot of people in our world sort of define it. So I don't know.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you're making exactly my point, which is I think service is, although I think it's a reflex. I mean, I think it's a reflex for the company to refer to it as customer service is our core competitive differentiation. I actually think in today's environment, service is much too narrow a way of
I agree.
Explain what it is that you do. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, yeah, I agree. So, and then the I don't know your point, Gigi. I mean, the local market strategy is well. I mean, you're certainly going to hear me talk more and more about this. The really, I think the competitively differentiated thing that we're really at the next 24 months is going to come to life in front of customers in a very different way is thinking about the way I sort of describe this is, to your point about it's not about channels. I don't care about channels, but again, we're starting with LA, and it's, if you think about this in the context of how can we serve customers in LA in a way that it's very hard for anybody else to even come close to, the way we are going to be able to do that is by linking a whole bunch of kind of assets and capabilities that we've been building that currently kind of are very point to point. They kind of sit out there in isolation, and it's only by bringing them together in a very different way that it sort of really matters to customers. So, I mean, not to get too deep into the details of this, but I just spoke at front of our technology team last week on this, and the point I was making to them, I mean, they're technology people, so they're working on building stuff every day that in and of itself they may or may not think is cool, but a lot of times they can't really connect it to how we're serving customers and where we're going. So my whole messaging there was, look, first of all, we've been doing a lot of work together, and a lot of the teams in this room have been working on building individual pieces of a puzzle. And now that we have these puzzle pieces kind of more and more than built, now we can actually assemble the thing in a way that is actually amazing for customers. So the example was, I went through a whole series of products, if you will, that these teams have been working on, some of which are customer facing, so stuff that you guys know about, like style boards is an example, dynamic looks is an example, the new app release is an example. Some of it is back of house stuff that we've been building, which is services that are things, again, not to get too deep into the details, but pieces that are being built around inventory and availability service and price and promotion service, which are a bunch of sort of back of the house sort of elements that allow us to run the business differently. And then there's stuff that is enabling store digital capabilities. So POS modernization, the stuff we need to do to get local stood up, infrastructure in stores, the Wi-Fi infrastructure in stores, and all of that. But if you put all that together, so individually, that's all sort of interesting. Some of it, even in the case of something like style boards, may be cool for an individual customer who's using it. But right now, it kind of sits out there as a bunch of pieces. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen first in LA, and then more broadly over the next 18 to 24 months, is all of a sudden we have the ability to bring all of that together. So the example I gave, I keep giving to folks, and you guys know, I think we're building some video vignettes and stuff for the leadership team meeting in January on this, is now just imagine that the experience you get as a customer is you're sitting in LA and you have the Nordstrom app because you're a great customer. You open up the app and you have a style board from your stylist shows up in the app as opposed to now it shows up somewhere else, right? Now it's in the app, it's integrated, and you go, oh, that's really cool. That's great. That's a great outfit, but I don't love it. I don't love all the elements that is on this style board. In particular, it's an outfit where I don't love the shoes. What we don't give you the opportunity to do now is, what we're building is use this thing we call dynamic looks that we've built, which enable us to swipe out those shoes, go, I don't like it. That's a set of shoes I can fall in love with. So I'm building my own outfit off the back of something that my salesperson has sent me inside the app using now the app, style boards, dynamic looks. But, we sell expensive stuff. So you're like, I still want to try this stuff on. I mean, it all looks kind of great here, but I'm not going to spend hundreds of dollars buying these 5 items. I want to try them on. Well, Store Reserve, which we've built currently as this sort of separate experience, should be integrated in that. It's one button. Store Reserve, I want to try it on. That's cool. And then it's like, but I don't love having to drive to Century City. Parking sucks there. But, oh, wait, Nordstrom Local. I can do Store Reserve in West Hollywood. Boom. And this is all happening, right? And that's just one vignette. I could give you 5 of these. But then the other aspect of it, which is more market-facing, is we build all this stuff today. And again, this is getting into sausage making for you guys. But something like Store Reserve isn't available in all stores. Okay, so I can't really market it because it's marketed with an asterisk. We're going to light it up in all stores in LA. So all 16 stores are going to have Store Reserve available. Right now, for again, some back office things, right now, Store Reserve, buy online, pickup in store, you're limited to the inventory in a store. But we're about to create without getting all the details, we're working on the plumbing that says Store Reserve could make you as a customer wouldn't see any difference, but the amount of selection you would see would be a lot different because now I'm going to see Store Reserve that is drawing from the inventory of, say, 6 stores that are all within a 2-hour drive time, so I can get it all together for you, and a fulfillment center that's going to have some inventory in LA. So the amount of selection available on Store Reserve, buy online, pick up in store, same day delivery is going to explode. So now I can market it. Right now I can start to, and so the task I've given to the team on this is we've got, and again, this isn't really an academic point. The way you would market any of this stuff in today's world is 15-second YouTube videos. So we're doing 5 of these YouTube videos that are all going to be about whether it's Nordstrom Yes or whatever the tagline. There's some tagline here, right? Which is, you see a 15-second video like what I described, and it's like Nordstrom Yes. You see billboards all over LA that are Nordstrom Yes, and you're like, what the hell is Nordstrom Yes? Well, it's the local app for, so all of a sudden you're bringing together, so there's puzzle pieces that are being built. Now, if you do all that, and there's another whole component of it, which I won't get into, which has to do with inventory in LA, and we've got our most important asset is actually inventory. It's the most defensible thing we have. It's our biggest capital investment, and right now it's kind of fragmented. So this is going to change all that. But the reality is, you do all that, it's imminently defensible because there's nobody else that I know of as a retailer that has half of those building blocks even built. They also, a lot of these things, if they relate to connecting digital and physical, like Store Reserve is a great example, it's only a good experience if it's operationalized well in the store. And that's really hard. Like getting standards of kind of execution excellence against these things is really hard because, buy online, pick up in store is the same way. It's a shitty experience to do buy online, pick up in store if, the theory of it is you're going to save time. If you show up and you have to wait for 10 minutes for somebody to find the shit, it's a bad experience. So the other reason we're sort of focusing on LA is so that Shay and the team can nail how the stuff gets executed. But the combination of we've got inventory other people don't have, we've got these technology sort of building blocks and experiences we've built that other people haven't built, and we're going to tie them together in a way that no one else has done, I think is, and then we have these store assets, including the people in stores that just are able to execute at a level that our competitors have never been able to execute on any of these dimensions. If you bring all that together, it's really, I think, both marketable, scalable, defensible, and and I think, again, back to the point, it also is not about being a department store where you're a landlord for brands. It's about being a shopping experience that's experiential and makes it really easy for customers to shop on their terms on many different ways. So that the end of that sort of vision I was painting to the technology team is how are we going to know we're successful? You're going to know we're successful because 3 years from now, you're going to wake up and see the Wall Street Journal article about how Amazon has decided not to go after fashion as a category and their explanation is going to be, yeah, we talked about fashion for a while, but, it's a really small category in the grand scheme of things. Groceries a lot bigger, consumables is a lot bigger, mass apparel is a lot bigger. So really, there's not enough there for us to have it continue to be a source of focus. And, oh, by the way, there's somebody else who's already doing it in a way that we don't really think we can add a lot to in the way of Nordstrom. So why would we do that? And that's not, to me, that I think that's imminently possible, right? Because, again, if you look at the sort of data around this, if we're able to light up the inventory in LA as an example in the way I just described, the number of choices we would have available to you as a customer in our categories, meaning fashion categories of a certain price point, dwarfs what Amazon has available through Prime Now or anybody else has. I mean, nobody else has that amount of selection, breadth, and depth in fashion categories at the kind of price points we're talking about. And obviously, nobody else has Topshop and Madewell and J. Crew and Everlane and other, limited distribution brands. They won't have that by definition. So if you tie all that together, to me, we're at this inflection point where I think traditional department store models are going to struggle because they don't add enough value to brands or customers. I think we are very different from that. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Very inspiring.
Well, I was going to say, but I think that's completely, and correct me if I'm overstating the importance of this, but in my view, this completely changes the conversation in retail. So, I mean, if what we're saying is, the whole notion of, digital versus brick and mortar is just completely the wrong way of thinking about this. The idea of channels is completely outdated. What we're saying is, the future, we already know the future is all about experiences, but what is less well understood is that it's about creating the most compelling set of assets that you can bring to create, a wide variety of experiences. And that is how we kind of think about, the future of retail. I mean, that's our point of view, is that it's about an ecosystem of assets and continuing to build strength of assets, across a pretty broad spectrum, to be able to constantly have experiences that are fresh and that are, that are about discovery.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the future of retail in certain categories, right? I mean,
Right.
the fact of the matter is that a lot of the stuff that is retail, meaning a lot of the stuff you buy, you just want to be easy. Like the reason dash buttons work, right, is because I don't want to discover a new laundry detergent. I just want to have my laundry detergent when I need it, right? There's no discovery in detergent, right? And that's why if you're a CPG company trying to launch a new detergent, it's really hard because you got to convince people that there's some reason to change the habit they already have. But if you're Amazon, these categories that are replenishment categories are custom made for them because they're taking friction out of the shopping experience. But I think the flip side of that is if you're in categories that are about product discovery, almost by definition, discovery implies friction. And everything about Amazon's model is about taking friction out. And so that part of retail, I think, is, there's a lot of reasons to take friction out of a lot of retail. So we want to be in the parts of retail where we don't want to make it harder than it needs to be, but we don't want to take away the parts of the experience that help you discover stuff you wouldn't otherwise find, or help you enjoy the experience of shopping, not just having something in your wardrobe. And I actually think that's a problem. I mean, you think about it, I think the stuff that I find, I don't know, depressing, but the stuff that I look in my closet and go, why do I own that? Is the stuff that I don't remember the experience of buying. It's like, why did I buy? Like, how did I even end up with that? I never wear, like, there's nothing interesting about it to me. I have no connection to it. And I think that's maybe kind of the problem with Amazon's model. And everyone who's chasing Amazon's model, I think, runs that risk. I mean, I probably have told you guys this. I'm still sort of shocked at this. I mean, first of all, I guess I should feel bad about this, but I do use Amazon. I do use Kindle as sort of my reading source, right? I mean, I buy electronic books. Amazon, and that's where the category they started in, it's a terrible discovery experience. I don't understand how they could have decimated the book industry and be so bad. Like, finding new things to read
that's true.
on Kindle and Amazon is horrible. It's just horrible, right? I mean, it's just not good. And that's not even hard. I mean, like, that's not nearly as hard as anything we sell, because you don't. All you need to know is that you might be interested in reading it. You know, like, you're not worried about the form factor. You're not trying to see, like, does it really look like the picture? I don't need it. There's no fit involved. I mean, all it is, but the only thing Amazon can do is to tell me you read a story about, you read a book about deep sea fishing. Let me recommend 5 more. Which I'm a little obsessive, so that's okay for the first 3. But then I'm like,
then you're like,
how many books do I need to read on this subject, right? And so I just think that people, this death knell of retail, it's localized, right? I think that, and I think we need to be careful about this. I mean, I think I won't get into it, but I've just been having a long and somewhat frustrating series of discussions with our loyalty team, because so much of what we're trying to do in terms of updating our loyalty program is focused on what I think are purely transactional things like shipping speed. And it's not that that's unimportant, but it's in the absence of, like, people don't need us to have a better transactional loyalty program. People need us to have a better experiential loyalty program.
Exactly.
I mean, like, it's
so glad you said that.
So it's frustrating. I mean, and it's funny, if you talk to Jyothi, actually, who runs UX for us, who worked at Starbucks, an example I would tell you is that they had this debate apparently in the Starbucks app when they were kind of working through it, and they, stuff like the kind of stars and the way some of the graphics and stuff work in their app. If you're just trying to make the app perform better and take less friction out, you simplify a whole bunch of those elements. And they tested this, and but customers really like the dropping stars. They really like all these graphics that are performant heavy on the app, slow things down, et cetera. So if you just were taking the view of take friction out, you just remove all this stuff, that it's all the experiential stuff. Like, at the end of the day, you still end up with 45 stars, whatever, right? But that doesn't have the same impact,
right?
As
I like to see it.
I like to see that.
I do. That's so funny. I do. I like.
That's the fun part.
It is.
But,
it's so funny. It's good.
I've lost my plot. So, where else are you going, Claire?
Can you mind talking about digitally native brands for a moment and Nord's current strategy on that? How it might compare to others in the same space?
Yeah. First of all, I don't know whether you have this, but if you don't, you should get it. Pearl and Trisha met with the GMMs on Monday to get those materials.
No.
So there's some materials around what brands we're working with, what brands we're talking to, how it all works, and I guess what I would tell you is I'm not. I used to be closer to the question of how does our strategy compare with what other people are doing. Pearl is better positioned probably to answer that than I can. What I can tell you is that what is interesting to me is like a lot of these things, 3, 4, 5 years ago when we were getting started on this, and when I was in particular spending a lot of time on this, it was a slog, including with our merchants, because it was like, well, the brand you're talking to me about, they're not very big, why don't you wait until they kind of grow up and come talk to us? And so internally, at least, the sort of educational process was like, you don't get, like, if we don't work with them when they're small and struggling to break out, when they get bigger, then everybody's, then everyone's talking to them. And like, then it just becomes kind of a bidding game, if you will, on different dimensions. Whereas if you build a relationship early with them and with their investors, there is a level of partnership and commitment that comes with that. And so I don't know whether that makes us different, but I will tell you that if you talk to the VCs we're in business with, they think that, and again, I don't think it's that different from what we did with Mac and Uggs and Tom's. I mean, it's now it's a different kind of environment, but it's the same thing, which is we're here to be your partner. We're not here to just be a vendor. And that means we will do different things. We will work hard to, support you and give you different payment terms and make sure that, we sort of have you show up in an outsized way in our brand, in our marketing, and in our presentation, because it's important for us, for you to, get your message out there with customers. And I think, that has kind of, I think what resonates, and again, I don't know whether it's how different it is, but I think it's different, is that there's enough brands now that see that the combination of Olivia's pop-up work and what we do with what we've done with digitally native brands is seen as we're the example of you don't want to overexpose your brand. You don't want to be in channels that go too fast and that can kind of destroy your brand. You don't want to be too transactional. Well, if you believe all those things, where do you want to be? Well, you want to be with Nordstrom, because they are, again, this is where I think being the curated kind of environment that's about experiential discovery serves us well, because these brands don't have the money to have a branded shop anyway. And so what they want is to kind of show up in a more interesting way in front of customers. And so, it's worked. And I think that those brands all talk to one another. So I think what's different about our strategy is we're willing to keep that dialogue going. We're proactive, but also we're willing to be patient. So if you take an example that I know a little bit about, but if you take an example like Allbirds, right? Allbirds is, if you're not familiar with it, like kind of the kind of sneaker for Silicon Valley. It's this all wool. You guys know Allbirds, but so, and I don't even remember now exactly. Well, I kind of remember. Anyway, I became familiar with Allbirds like 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, when they were really small, and got interested in them. And then we knew one of their investors. And so we got introduced, but they were like, look, we don't need you. They weren't rude about it. They're like, we're struggling just to kind of grow the business. And they're growing sort of meteorically for quite a while. And they're like, we can barely keep up with, our own production needs. And we're like, that's fine, but let's keep the dialogue going and keep the dialogue going. And, and then 18 months later, they're like, well, we're going to need to break through in a bigger way. And now, now Robert Evans, we're going to launch them in the spring here, or by anniversary anyway. And that is not an uncommon story. If you talk to Pearl, a lot of it's not, being willing to invest in some level of partnership with them well in advance of doing business with them. And then I think our track record of living up to kind of our commitments with these folks is pretty good. And so, again, I think on our side of the fence, what's worked is this limited distribution preferred partner stuff was, let's say it was a slog, but if you go back to, the Bonobos and Topshops of the world, they didn't happen bottoms up, or they did in our pyramid, but they happened because Pete and I told people we're going to do these things. And not all the merchants agreed, like Bonobos, David Whitman at the time did not agree. And Topshop, our men's team, didn't want to do it. And
Wow.
But now, if you look across the board, what's happened is our merchants are like, wow, in a promotional world, these brands are growing at a much faster rate than the rest of the business, and they have higher margin. Merchants like that.
Digitally native specific, is that what you're saying, Ken? I'm sorry.
Digitally native, and it's more limited distribution. It's not just digitally native. I think what's taken longer, the digitally native brands tend to be smaller, but I think that people have seen the halo effect of that.
Mm-hmm.
Everlane's a good example. Yeah. These are businesses. Those brands punch above their weight. Bonobos was an example. Bonobos' reputation was much bigger than its top line, and probably still is. And, it's localized. It's not like every customer knows Bonobos is, but the customers that do are highly engaged with the brand. So some of them are digitally native. And the same thing, we got street cred for doing pop-up with Warby Parker. Not because we're doing mass distribution with Warby Parker, but because for the people that care, they associate it's cool. Like, I like Warby Parker, they're cool. I like Nordstrom, and they're cooler because they have Warby Parker. And I'm like, and that it's the same story. I think it's part of the reason that stuff is harder for our merchants is, again, back to the previous example, they're coming to realize that we're going to have to do business with 10 smaller brands because you no longer can find one big or two big brands to bet on. Makes the job harder too. I think it's more interesting, but you got to get on and off those brands a lot faster because they kind of scale up and some of them go away a lot faster. So, I think it's not just digitally native, but it's, I think it's interesting. I think what we've done with Brandy Melville and with Madewell and with J. Crew, these specialty brands is also interesting. These are in the same way that digitally native brands, a lot of them were not set up to wholesale. J. Crew and Madewell and Crew Cuts and Brandy Melville and these kind of vertical specialty brands weren't set up to wholesale either, meaning they don't have the margin structure. They have a different margin structure than somebody that sets up Vince Camuto as a brand. But in the same way that other aspects of retail have changed, it's become more and more challenging to be a specialty vertical retailer in a traditional sense. And so, for them, a lot of these relationships, they not view us as marketing, but they're not just a vendor relationship. We're giving them exposure to a set of customers that they wouldn't get. And we're getting a set of customers in our store who either think we're cooler because we're associated with these, cool brands, or they think it's great that they're able to find brands they love in the retailer they love, right? Which, that's kind of more the J. Crew story. Nobody goes, I couldn't find where to buy J. Crew. Right. But they go, oh, this is awesome. Now I can buy my favorite brand at my favorite retailer.
Exactly.
I like the environment. And so.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you. Gigi, anything else you think that we should cover?
No, I think we really wanted to hear from you in your voice about local market strategy. And I think articulated so well.
The one thing you should just know, it's a bit of a challenge. This is an internal point, not an external point, but the local market strategy is most powerful in big markets. And so one of the things that, I was talking to the executive team about this yesterday, is everyone's all excited about local market strategy. Like, we got to go make it part of the state of the company. I'm like, that's great, but just remember that what I'm talking about is most relevant and most powerful in our 10 largest markets, which are multi-store markets. Because it's not hard, like things like lighting up the inventory from multiple stores only matters if you have multiple stores, right? Like, if you're in Nashville, there's one store, right? I mean, so one of the challenges is if you look at our 120 stores, about, well, it depends on how you do math, but 40 or 50 of them, 60 of them, half of them are not in our 10 largest DMAs. So my point about that isn't that we're going to suck in those 60 markets, but my point is that a lot of the ways you make, and again, you can make the story still be pretty interesting even if we have one store market, but that's not the place where we're really going to crush it is in LA, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, Houston. These markets that have the complexity, and both on our side and on the customer side, they're more complex markets because they're bigger and multifaceted and more competitive. And so that's just a kind of an intro.
It's good to know.
The other thing I would you don't need to do anything with this, although think about one, for all of my optimism, and I have a lot of optimism about what we've been building and how we're going to bring it together, one sobering point to me is that for the third year in a row, our business is going to be weakest in the most competitive shopping period, which is holiday. If you look at, and I think I know why, but you kind of look at our business. It's good. It's not terrible. It's not as good as it is the rest of the year when we get into this holiday period. And I think that there's two reasons for that, but they're kind of interrelated. One is holidays become more and more of a promotional shopping period, and we have to have a better answer to that, which I think we'll work through. The other thing is that I think that it's also become a noisier and noisier kind of period of time from a marketing and messaging perspective, and I think we need to be take more risk and be, I don't even know, more purposeful, but be willing to be louder during the period when the volume goes up in the room. So the other thing I'll just highlight to you is one of the challenges about, for us online at least, one of the challenges of this holiday period versus last holiday period is we're comping The Rock. And that is actually,
that's really funny.
I mean that not to be trivial. No, I actually mean it to be, there was literally, we now have like real time. I watch real time telemetry of the digital business, right? So I can see exactly what's happening year on year and relative to plan. I can show you a graph where like literally I turned to the team and said, like, what the heck just happened? Like, we were doing so well on this particular day earlier this month, and all of a sudden our comps dropped dramatically. It was literally the minute that the Rock story hit BuzzFeed last year.
You're kidding.
Literally to the minute.
Wow.
Like, you could see it. And last year, when that story first hit, everybody internally was like, oh my God, I'm embarrassed. Why are we selling a leather-wrapped rock? That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen, right? And then as the month went on last year, people were like, well, maybe it wasn't so dumb. Like, it's the biggest social trending story, and it's on Jimmy Fallon. And like, The Rock.
Jimmy Fallon,
We estimate that 500,000 unique visitors to the website last December came because of The Rock.
Yeah.
And some of them bought something. So my point about that is that you can't manufacture those things per se.
Yeah.
Kind of can.
But you can kind of be more purposeful about them. And certainly when something happens, you should throw every bit of fuel on those fires as you can. So, and again, this is not to be critical of marketing and certainly not to be critical of individuals who I think are really talented. But I'll also say, like, even in the context of what we do, I thought the love campaign last year was pretty good. This year we did the same campaign. Like, you can't repack, like, whatever. I mean, it's done. It's over. Move on. Do something dramatically different. You can't do the same thing. And we do the same thing. Merchants do the same thing. Marketing, like, whatever. Move on. The world moves too fast. And so I think that gets amplified a lot during the holiday for me. Because the rest of the year you can kind of get by with and not feel it so much this time of the year. If we're not going to be promotional, we damn well better be loud about something. And we're loud about nothing. And so,
Interesting.
And then I will say, I mean, this is now really, it's kind of tactical, but again, not so much the narrative. Now I'm off to more of Gigi's world. I'll give you another example of like I think a reasonably good idea that we had this year, that the execution of it, I think, meant it wasn't all that good an idea, which was the 12 Days of Christmas campaign. Like, that was a reasonably good idea if it was what everybody on my team thought it was, which was, so for 12 days in a row, we're going to have exclusive product that we unwrap one at a time. No,
it's
this
like
is just a marketing. This is just a marketing repackaging of shit I could have bought yesterday on the website and shit I can buy tomorrow on the website. Like, well, that's not interesting at all. I mean, that's just marketing. Like, there's nothing authentic or interesting. There's no call to action.